If you like this story, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next exciting stories. And now let's enjoy the story. The courtroom buzzed with hushed murmurs as the gavel struck the wood, signaling the beginning of another case. Judge Rachel Westbrook sat behind the bench, her black robe flowing down to the floor, her eyes scanning over the case file in front of her. Another assault case, another robbery. It was the kind of day that felt like routine. It was just another set of criminals to be processed. Another chapter in the endless cycle of justice she had become so accustomed to. The defendant was called the State of Louisiana versus Marcus Harper. Rachel paused. The name hit her like a jolt of electricity, her fingers tightening around the gavel. Harper. Marcus Harper? She hadn't heard that name in over 2 decades, and yet it brought a flood of memories back. Memories she had tried so hard to bury. Marcus stood in front of her, his back hunched in shackles, his face drawn with exhaustion. His once vibrant eyes now dull, his shoulders stooped under the weight of years of hardship. The man before her looked nothing like the carefree boy she once knew. Nothing like the Marcus Harper, who had once been her best friend. Rachel's heart raced as the memories came flooding back. Summers spent racing bicycles through the quiet streets of their small town, Hammond, Louisiana. Days spent by the creek, where they would catch tadpoles, laugh until they couldn't breathe, and talk about their dreams of escaping the small, segregated world that bound them. Rachel and Marcus were inseparable, despite the whispers, despite the looks. She was from the right side of town. He was from the wrong side, but none of that mattered to them. They were just kids. Their friendship had ended the summer before high school. Her father had caught them sitting together on the porch one afternoon, and his disapproving words sealed the fate of their relationship. Rachel's father had forbidden her from seeing Marcus ever again. Soon after, Marcus's family had moved away, and Rachel had thrown herself into her schoolwork, burying the memories of her best friend in the depths of her mind. Now here he was, accused of a violent crime. "Mr. Harper, you stand accused of assault, robbery, and resisting arrest. How do you plead?" Rachel asked, her voice steady, though inside her heart was screaming. "Not guilty, Your Honor," Marcus responded, his voice hoarse, barely audible. His eyes flickered toward her, a brief moment of recognition passing between them. But then he quickly looked away, his gaze falling to the floor. Rachel tried to steady her breath. The prosecutor, Thomas Wells, continued with the case, detailing the crime Marcus was accused of, a violent robbery at a Baton Rouge convenience store. The store clerk had been assaulted and the cash register emptied. Surveillance footage allegedly showed a man in a red hoodie who matched Marcus's description committing the crime. Rachel's thoughts whirled. She had to remain impartial. She had to focus on the facts of the case, but she couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in her stomach. Was this the Marcus she had once known? Or had something inside him changed so much that he was now capable of this violence? As the trial progressed, Rachel found herself unable to focus. Every moment she spent in the courtroom was a reminder of the boy who had once been her world. The memories of their secret meetings, the quiet understanding they shared, despite the town's disapproval, came flooding back. But there were no memories of violence, no indication that Marcus was capable of the things he was being accused of. The prosecutor, Wells, was relentless. He painted Marcus as nothing more than a violent criminal, someone who was already well accustomed to the justice system. According to the police report, Marcus had been arrested just a few blocks away from the scene of the crime, with the stolen cash still in his possession. The evidence seemed damning. It was hard for Rachel to reconcile the man before her with the boy she once knew. The defense attorney, Lisa Porter, was young but sharp, confident in her ability to challenge the prosecution's claims. She immediately questioned the reliability of the evidence. The surveillance footage was grainy. The red hoodie worn by the suspect couldn't be definitively linked to Marcus. And the witness testimony, while detailed, was based on a vague description. No one had seen the face of the man who attacked the clerk. The only thing they knew for sure was that the person had been wearing dark clothing, not the red hoodie the police had insisted on. Rachel felt the tide beginning to shift. Lisa's questions were exposing the flaws in the prosecution's case. But then came the testimony of the arresting officer, Officer Daniel Harris. Rachel's stomach turned as Officer Harris took the stand. He was a burly man with a stone-faced demeanor, and his testimony painted a picture of Marcus as a hardened criminal. According to Harris, he had arrested Marcus simply because he fit the description, a black male in his mid-40s wearing dark clothing. No mention of a red hoodie, no mention of any real evidence. Just a hunch. Lisa pressed him relentlessly. So you arrested my client based on a vague description, without any physical evidence linking him to the crime? You didn't find the red hoodie, you didn't find any weapon, and you didn't even search the area for discarded items. Officer Harris shifted uncomfortably. I followed protocol, he muttered, clearly uncomfortable with the mounting pressure. Lisa's eyes flashed with determination. And that protocol led you to arrest a man based solely on his appearance. No evidence, no questions. You assumed guilt, didn't you? The officer stammered, but Rachel saw it. The cracks in his testimony. The guilt on his face. He had acted based on assumptions that had led to an innocent man's arrest. The defense also brought in a forensic expert who reviewed the surveillance footage. The expert confirmed what Lisa had suspected. The timestamp on the video had been altered, making the footage unreliable. The video was poor quality, and there was no way to confirm that the person in the footage was Marcus. The prosecution fought back, but the damage had been done. The jury was unsettled. As the days wore on, Rachel found herself in a constant battle. Her heart ached as she watched Marcus stand in front of her, fighting for his freedom. But she knew the truth was not just about the facts. It was about a system that had already condemned him before he even stepped foot in the courtroom. It was about a system that assumed guilt because of the color of his skin and the neighborhood he came from. The trial was a microcosm of the larger societal issues at play. The biases that existed within the community, the assumptions that people made about those like Marcus, who had been failed by the system time and time again. Rachel's mind raced. She knew that Marcus deserved a fair trial, but how could she truly provide that when everything about the case felt like a setup from the start? The final day of the trial arrived, and both sides presented their closing arguments. The prosecutor urged the jury to trust the system, to trust the evidence. Lisa, however, urged them to look deeper, to see beyond the surface and recognize the human beings standing in front of them. She asked the jury to question the assumptions they had made, to look at the whole picture. Marcus himself took the stand one last time. His voice cracked as he spoke. I've made mistakes in my life, Your Honor. I've been through hell, but I didn't do this. I wasn't there. I was walking home that night. I was just trying to survive. His words hit Rachel like a ton of bricks. She had known him. She had known him when he was a boy full of dreams. How had it come to this? The jury deliberated for hours. Rachel sat in the silence of the courtroom, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She had seen the injustice in Marcus's case from the very beginning, the assumptions, the biases, but could she be the one to correct it? Finally, the jury returned with their verdict. We find the defendant, Marcus Harper, not guilty. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Marcus's face remained unreadable as the judge banged her gavel. After the verdict was read, Marcus was free to go, but Rachel couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness. The system had worked, but had justice truly been served? The town would go on, and Marcus would disappear back into the world. But how many others would continue to face the same fate? How many other lives would be ruined because of prejudice? Because of assumptions? As Marcus left the courtroom, he turned to her. His face softened, and for the first time in years, he spoke to her. You knew me, Rachel, he said quietly. You knew who I was. But the world never gave me that chance. Rachel nodded slowly. I'm sorry, she whispered. I wish I had done more. Marcus gave her a faint nod before walking out the door, disappearing into the world once more. Rachel sat back in her chair, staring at the empty space in front of her. She had upheld the law, but the law was not always just. It was a reminder of how much more there was to be done, not just in the courtroom, but in the world. She made a silent vow as she left the courtroom that day. She couldn't change the past, but she would use her platform to fight for those who had been silenced for far too long. The days following the trial were restless for Rachel. Despite the victory in court, a sense of unease lingered. As she walked through the courthouse, she could still hear the echoes of Marcus's voice, His plea for justice, not just for himself, but for the system to recognize his humanity. It had taken all her strength to remain impartial, but the weight of his words left her shaken. She knew deep down that the trial was just one part of a much larger, more systemic issue. She spent sleepless nights reflecting on the case. The prosecutor, Wells, had leaned so heavily on circumstantial evidence, relying on bias rather than the truth. Marcus's defense had uncovered the cracks in the prosecution's narrative, but those cracks had been too easily overlooked by the majority of society. Rachel could feel the ripple effects of her decision reverberating through her life. Marcus had been granted his freedom, but would the system ever truly give him, or anyone like him, an equal shot? One evening, as she walked to her car, she was stopped by Margaret, her assistant. "Judge, you're looking, I don't know, distant," Margaret said, concern lacing her tone. "Is everything okay? You've been a bit off lately." Rachel shook her head. "It's just, I don't know. Something doesn't sit right. Marcus was acquitted, yes, but the truth feels like it's slipping through my fingers. There are still so many like him out there. People who don't get the same chances, who aren't given the same fairness." Margaret nodded. "I hear you. We see it every day in the courtroom. But what can we do about it?" Rachel paused, staring at the evening sky. "I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. There has to be more I can do than just hand down verdicts." Months passed after the trial, but Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus's case was just one example of a much larger problem. A problem of systemic injustice. A system that worked tirelessly to convict people before they ever had a chance. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how often the law favored the powerful, the privileged, and the wealthy, while the poor and marginalized were left to rot. One rainy evening, while Rachel was in her office, she received an unexpected phone call. It was from Lisa Porter, the defense attorney who had fought for Marcus's innocence. "Judge Westbrook," Lisa's voice was urgent, "I need to speak with you. It's about Marcus." Rachel's heart skipped a beat. "What's happened? Is he okay?" "He's fine, but for now, but there's something you need to know, something that wasn't part of the trial. You see, Marcus isn't just a victim of the system. He's been running from something much darker." Rachel leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" Lisa paused. "I can't say much over the phone, but Marcus has been trying to protect people from something. A criminal organization that's been operating right under our noses. He's been tangled up in their web for years. The robbery? It wasn't him. It was a setup. They knew he would take the fall. He was just a pawn." Rachel's mind raced. But why didn't he tell us this? Why wasn't this brought to light during the trial? "Because he didn't want anyone to know the truth," Lisa said, her voice barely a whisper. "The people he's trying to protect are dangerous. More dangerous than you can imagine." Over the next few weeks, Rachel began to dig deeper into Marcus's past. She met with Lisa, and the two of them combed through every scrap of evidence they could find. They uncovered a story far more disturbing than they had anticipated. Marcus had been part of a group of whistleblowers, exposing a massive network of illegal activities that had been using small towns like Hammond as front lines for their operations. The deeper Rachel went, the more she uncovered. Marcus had witnessed brutal crimes, been forced into silence by threats, and had become a reluctant participant in a series of cover-ups. The robbery he was accused of wasn't random. It was orchestrated by those who wanted him out of the picture. The money stolen from the convenience store wasn't for personal gain. It was to fuel the operations of a cartel that had its fingers in every part of the local economy. Rachel realized that Marcus hadn't just been a victim of the system. He had been fighting a battle that no one else had even known about. But in his attempts to keep others safe, he had been dragged deeper into the criminal world. His arrest had been an unfortunate consequence of his struggle. Rachel confronted Marcus, meeting him at a local diner late one evening. She watched him closely as he sat across from her, his face tired and weathered. There were no signs of the boy she had once known. He was a man broken by years of fighting, by the weight of the world pressing down on him. "Marcus, why didn't you tell anyone the truth?" she asked softly. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't want to drag anyone else into this mess. I've spent my whole life fighting against a system that doesn't care about people like me." I thought I could protect everyone, but I was wrong. I never wanted anyone to get hurt, especially you." Rachel's heart broke. "I had no idea. I had no idea what you were going through." Marcus looked at her, his eyes filled with regret. "It's not just me, Rachel. It's so many people like me. They're being crushed under the weight of a system that was never built for them. I got lucky. Some of them aren't so lucky." The more Rachel learned, the more disgusted she became with the system she had worked so hard to uphold. The truth was there, hidden beneath layers of corruption, bias, and prejudice. People like Marcus had been sacrificed, their lives torn apart because they weren't deemed important enough to fight for. The trial, the evidence, the verdict, all of it seemed like a mere distraction from the real issues at play. In her heart, Rachel knew what needed to be done. The system couldn't change overnight, but she could be the spark that started the fire. She could use her position to expose the darkness, to call out the injustices that had long been ignored. Rachel walked into the courtroom one morning with a new sense of purpose. She no longer saw her job as merely handing down verdicts. She saw it as an opportunity to speak for those who had been silenced for far too long. She began speaking out against the system. She used her position to shed light on the racial biases that ran deep within the justice system, to call for reform in the way cases were handled, to push for a fairer, more compassionate system. She worked with Lisa Porter and other attorneys to fight for those who had been wrongly convicted, to expose the corrupt practices that had led to so many innocent people being imprisoned. And though she knew the road ahead would be difficult, Rachel had made a vow to herself. She would do whatever it took to ensure that the future was different. The future would be one where justice wasn't just a word, but a reality. Marcus never fully escaped the shadows of his past, but the weight of his history no longer defined him. He worked to rebuild his life, helping others who had been silenced and forgotten, just as he once had been. He became an advocate for the truth, a living testament to the strength of perseverance, and a voice for those who had been wronged by the system. And in the years that followed, Rachel's efforts began to spark change. The trial that had started as a simple case of robbery had grown into something much larger, a movement that took down a corrupt system and gave a voice to the voiceless. As Rachel stood before the courthouse steps one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she knew the fight wasn't over, but it had begun, and that was enough for now. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please support me by clicking the logo in the bottom right corner to subscribe to my channel. This way you won't miss any of the exciting stories coming up. Thank you so much.